What would you do if you saw a ship so strong that your strongest weapons could not even scratch it? And what if that ship was not even a warship, but something the builders called a mining vessel? Fire. If you enjoy stories like this, take a second to like, subscribe, and share. It helps this channel grow and brings more episodes like this your way. The bridge of the Imperial Command ship went silent as the first scan reports came in. No alarms yet. No panic yet. Just confusion building slowly like a storm that nobody wanted to name. Commander Zeter stood still, watching the holographic display. Something was wrong. Not in a small way. Not in a routine way. This was different. Human activity had always been noisy but harmless. Or at least, that was the assumption. They were new to the galactic stage, still classed as a developing species. Limited ships. Limited reach. Limited everything. That was the rule. That was the system. That was how order stayed intact. But the readings in front of him did not match any of that. Massive energy output. Heavy construction signatures. A structure forming in orbit around a human home system that should not have been possible. Report, Zeter said calmly. A sensor officer hesitated before speaking. Commander, it is large. Very large. We are reading a structure over 15 kilometers in length and still growing. Zeter blinked once. That is not a ship class allowed for their level. Yes, Commander. Silence returned. The kind of silence that carries weight. Then came the second report. No weapons detected. That made Zeter turn his head slightly. Repeat. No weapons, sir. No plasma cannons, no missile systems, no energy turrets. Nothing that matches combat design. Now the confusion deepened. A structure that large, with that much power, and no weapons at all. That did not make sense in Imperial logic. Then what is it? Zeter asked. The officer hesitated again. Industrial systems. Mining equipment. Refining units. Energy processing cores. It appears to be a mobile industrial complex. Zeter frowned. A ship of that size for mining? Yes, Commander. That answer should have made things better. It did not. Because mining ships were not supposed to look like that. And they were definitely not supposed to carry energy levels that rivaled small stars. Zeter made a decision. We inspect it directly. The fleet moved. 12 Imperial cruisers exited faster than light travel at the edge of the human system. The view opened like a wound in space, revealing a world full of motion. Human stations everywhere. Ships moving in organized chaos. Entire orbital rings filled with industry. And at the center of it all, the structure. It was not just large. It was overwhelming. A massive hull, layered and reinforced, stretching across space like a constructed moon. Even unfinished, it felt heavier than anything Zeter had ever seen. What are we looking at? One officer whispered. No one answered. Zeter zoomed the display closer. His eyes narrowed. The hull thickness alone was unusual. Oversized plating. Reinforced segments. Structural layering that suggested extreme stress resistance. This was not decorative engineering. This was survival engineering. A human transmission opened. A calm voice appeared on screen. A woman in a blue uniform. Welcome to our construction zone, she said politely. Zeter did not return the greeting. You are building outside your allowed classification. The woman tilted her head slightly. This is a civilian generation vessel. All permissions were filed. Your structure exceeds every known civilian limit. It is designed for long-duration travel with a large population, she replied. We need space, resources, and safety margins. Safety margins. That phrase stuck in Zeter's mind. Because nothing about this structure looked like a simple safety margin. He gestured to his fleet. We will inspect directly. A pause followed. Then the woman nodded. Understood. We will open access points for inspection. No resistance. No hesitation. No fear. That alone was unusual. Inspection teams were sent aboard. And that was when everything began to change. Inside the structure, the Imperial inspectors found corridors stretching farther than expected. Industrial halls larger than city blocks. Machines designed for one purpose only, to process matter on a scale that felt unnatural. And yet still no weapons. Only tools. But the tools were the problem. Mining lasers powerful enough to cut planetary crust. Gravity systems capable of moving asteroids. Refining cores operating at temperatures close to stellar surfaces. Every system was industrial. Every system was extreme. One report came back quickly. Commander, this ship could dismantle a moon in weeks. Zeter felt a cold pressure build in his chest. That was not normal for a mining vessel. Then came the energy spike. The ship powered up briefly. A routine cycle, the humans said. But Imperial sensors recorded something else entirely. A surge of energy that exceeded their entire fleet combined for a fraction of a second. Just a cycle. Just routine. Zeter stepped back slowly. That was a star-level output. Yes, Commander. Now it was no longer just unusual. It was terrifying in a way that did not have a category yet. And the humans were still calm. Still polite. Still calling it civilian work. Fire if you are still with this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. More is coming, and it only gets bigger from here. Zeter ordered a weapons test. A small one. A controlled one. A single plasma shot struck the hull. Nothing happened. No damage. No heat response. No structural stress. It was as if space itself had ignored the attack. A second shot followed. Stronger. Still nothing. The human captain watched quietly through the communication channel. Are you testing something? She asked politely. Zeter did not answer immediately. Because he did not know how to answer. Finally he said, we are verifying structural resistance. Oh, she replied. You can continue if you need. We usually test our hulls in stellar environments, so this is much lower stress than normal. Zeter slowly turned to his officers. They had just fired military weapons at full efficiency. And the target had compared it to sunlight. That was the moment fear entered the bridge fully. Not panic. Not chaos. Just understanding. This was not a vulnerable species. This was a species that had never needed to build weapons because everything they built already behaved like one. Another report arrived. They mine inside stars, the science officer said quietly. Zeter did not respond. He was already thinking ahead. If this was a mining ship, what did a warship look like? The thought was not spoken out loud. But everyone on the bridge had it anyway. The Imperial fleet pulled back slightly. The humans returned to work as if nothing had happened. And in that moment, Zeter realized something that would not leave him. The galaxy had been measuring humanity wrong from the beginning. Not as soldiers. Not as predators. But as engineers who had never once been told they should be afraid of their own creations. And that made them harder to predict than anything the Empire had ever faced. Because they were not trying to win wars. They were trying to survive reality itself. And everything they built reflected that one idea. Survive. No matter what. No matter how extreme the solution needed to be. Even if it meant building ships that looked like mining tools. Ships that could not be damaged. Energy systems that behaved like stars. Industrial tools that could tear apart worlds. And a question that no one wanted to ask out loud. If this is what they use to mine, what exactly would they build if they ever decided to fight? Fire if you are enjoying this story, like, subscribe, and share. The next part changes everything. The Imperial Command was no longer treating humanity as a curiosity. Now it was a calculation. A very dangerous one. And calculations always lead to decisions. Big ones. And irreversible ones. What happens when an empire that controls thousands of systems realizes it might not be the strongest power in space anymore? And worse, what if the thing stronger than it does not even realize it is strong? Before we go further, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps push more stories like this to you. The Imperial Chamber did not feel like a place where uncertainty was allowed. Everything inside it was designed for control. Clean lines. Perfect symmetry. A sense that every decision made here shaped the entire galaxy. But today, control felt fragile. The holographic image of the human mining vessel still hovered in the center of the room. Quiet. Massive. Unmoving. Like it was waiting for something, even though it had no idea it was being watched. The Imperatrix stood still for a long moment. Then she spoke. "We are not dealing with a developing species," she said slowly. "We are dealing with something we misunderstood from the beginning." No one interrupted her. Not because they agreed. Because they were thinking too. The Almirant finally broke the silence. "With respect, Your Majesty, they are still civilians. Their ships are not armed. Their actions are not hostile." The Imperatrix turned slightly. "And yet our weapons cannot harm them," she replied. That sentence changed the weight in the room. Because it removed comfort. Comfort came from superiority. From control. From knowing that if something went wrong, it could be fixed with force. But force had already been tested. And it failed. The scientific advisor stepped forward. "It is not just durability," he said carefully. "It is design philosophy. Everything human engineering produces is built with survival as the highest priority. Not efficiency. Not cost. Survival." He paused. "That creates systems far beyond our military standards, even when they are not intended for combat." A junior officer spoke quietly. "So they are dangerous by accident." No one corrected him. Because it sounded correct. And that was the most disturbing part. The Imperatrix turned back to the hologram. "Then we must assume one thing," she said. "If they ever decide to become intentional, we may not recognize the threat until it is too late." Silence again. Heavy. Tight. Then a diplomatic officer stepped forward. "There is another option," he said. "We do not treat them as a threat. We do not treat them as civilians either. We treat them as a partner. We bind them with agreements before fear turns into misunderstanding." The Almirant frowned. "And if they break those agreements?" The officer did not hesitate. "Then we will already be standing beside them, not in front of them." That idea lingered in the room longer than any weapon report had. The Imperatrix slowly exhaled. "Send the diplomatic mission," she said finally. "But I want full escort. Not as intimidation. As visibility." She looked at the fleet projection again. 300 warships. Enough to erase systems. And yet, still not enough to feel safe against mining ships. That thought alone was enough to make her decision clear. "We are not showing force," she continued. "We are showing reality. They must understand what their existence represents before someone else forces them to learn it violently." Far away, in human space, nothing had changed. Asteroids were still being mined. Stations were still being built. Workers were still arguing about efficiency schedules and material quotas. To them, everything was normal. Because nothing had told them otherwise. Not yet. On the mining vessel Unbreakable Labor, Captain Chen stood in the control room reviewing output reports. One of her engineers leaned back in his chair. "So," he said casually, "did we just get inspected by an alien military, or was that a weird maintenance visit?" Chen did not look up. "I think it was both," she replied. Another engineer laughed. Pretty sure they tried to break our hull. They did, Chen said calmly. And? She finally looked up. And we are still behind schedule. The room went quiet for a second. Then someone sighed. Of course we are. That was human engineering culture in one sentence. If it still works, you move on. No celebration. No fear. Just the next task. But Chen had seen something during the inspection that stayed in her mind. The aliens were not confused because of aggression. They were confused because of capability. They did not understand why anyone would build something so strong unless it was meant to be a weapon. And that misunderstanding worried her more than the test itself. Because misunderstandings scale. Especially in space. A week later, the Imperial diplomatic fleet arrived at the edge of human territory. Human sensors picked them up immediately. Not as a threat. But as traffic. Large traffic. Very large traffic. One of the junior coordinators blinked at the display. Why are there so many ships? Chen looked at it and answered without emotion. Because they are not sure about us. Still. A pause. Then another engineer spoke. Do we need to do something? Chen shook her head. No. Keep mining. That was the second time humanity unknowingly unsettled an empire. By not reacting. The Imperial fleet expected response protocols. Defensive positioning. Military readiness. Instead, they saw cargo routes rerouted around them politely. Like they were a scheduled inconvenience. Not a threat. Not a problem. Just something to work around. The Imperatrix watched this through live feed. They are not afraid, she said quietly. The Almirant responded. They do not even recognize us as a threat vector. That sentence carried more concern than anything else said that day. Because fear can be controlled. Ignorance cannot. A diplomatic channel opened. Captain Chen appeared again. She looked slightly tired. We received your arrival notice, she said. Do you need docking support or transport assistance? The Imperial ambassador paused. This was not the opening they had prepared for. I am here on behalf of the Imperial Council, he said carefully. We are requesting formal discussion regarding safety, military capacity, and future conduct. Chen nodded slowly. Okay, she said. What specifically is the concern? There it was. The simplest question in the galaxy. And the hardest to answer. The ambassador hesitated. We believe your industrial vessels exceed safe thresholds of power and durability. Chen blinked. Safe for who? That question landed harder than expected. For galactic stability, he replied. Chen leaned slightly forward. Our ships are built for survival in extreme environments. We are not designed for conflict. The ambassador chose his words carefully. And yet, they outperform military vessels in multiple stress tests. Chen nodded. Yes. Because military vessels are designed to fight each other. We are designed to survive stars. A pause. A long one. Then Chen added something that changed the tone entirely. If your ships were built to survive inside a star, they would probably outperform ours too. That doesn't mean you are preparing for war. The Imperial Council had no immediate response to that. Because it made sense. And that was the problem. It made too much sense. The Imperatrix watched the exchange and finally said what no one else wanted to. They are not building weapons, she said. They are building inevitability. The diplomatic officer frowned. Your Majesty. She gestured toward the display. Every system they create assumes survival in impossible conditions. That means anything less than extreme durability is unacceptable. She paused. And if everything they build is designed that way, then everything they build can be used that way. The Almirant finally understood. So even if they never intend war, they are already equipped for it, she finished. A quiet spread through the chamber. Not fear this time. Recognition. Far away, Chen ended the call and returned to her reports. One of her engineers spoke quietly. They seem stressed. Chen nodded. They are overthinking our engineering. Should we simplify it for them? Chen considered that. Then shook her head. No. We would have to make our ships worse to make them feel better. That is not how safety works. She paused. If they want to understand us, they need to understand why we build like this. The engineer smiled slightly. So we are just going to keep mining rocks until they figure it out. Chen looked back at the screen. That is the plan. Outside the window, another mining vessel slowly cut through an asteroid the size of a small moon. Effortless. Routine. Human. And somewhere in Imperial space, the realization was settling in deeper. Not that humanity was dangerous. But that danger was not something humanity had ever tried to avoid in the first place. They had simply built past it. Fire if you are enjoying this, like, subscribe, and share. The story is only getting bigger from here. And in space, anything built without limits eventually becomes something no one can ignore. The Imperial fleet did not move. It hovered at the edge of human space like a thought that refused to turn into action. 300 warships. Perfect formation. Perfect discipline. Perfect uncertainty. On every bridge, the same problem repeated itself in different words. If we fire, what happens? If we do not fire, what happens later? And underneath both questions was the one no officer wanted to write in a report. What if we are not the strongest thing here anymore? Inside the command vessel, the Almirant Voxlon stared at the tactical display without speaking. The human mining operations continued in the background feed. Calm. Efficient. Unbothered. Asteroids were being broken apart like dry soil. Materials were being sorted, refined, shipped. No panic. No alarms. No acknowledgement that a military fleet was watching them. The Consulheiro Diplomatico finally spoke. They are not reacting to us as a threat because they do not experience us as a threat. Voxlon replied without looking away. That is exactly what makes this dangerous. The Consulheiro frowned. How so? Voxlon finally turned. Every species we have ever encountered built weapons first and then learned fear, he said. Humans seem to have done the opposite. They built survival so effectively that fear became irrelevant. A pause. That does not make them peaceful. It makes them untested. Silence followed that. Because everyone understood what untested meant. It meant no one knew where the limits were. And in military thinking, unknown limits were worse than known enemies. A signal arrived from the human side again. Captain Chen. Still calm. Still ordinary. Are you proceeding with the diplomatic meeting? She asked. Voxlon hesitated. Yes, he said. We are ready to begin discussions regarding system safety protocols. Chen nodded. All right. We can host that. Do you want a station or one of your ships? That question created another pause. The idea that humans were casually offering their own infrastructure to a fleet of warships was not lost on anyone. Voxlon chose carefully. A neutral meeting point would be preferred. Sure, Chen replied. We will send coordinates. She paused slightly. Just a heads up, it might be noisy there. We are moving a lot of ore today. Noisy. That was how she described planetary-scale industrial extraction happening a few kilometers away from a diplomatic meeting involving the most powerful fleet in known space. The transmission ended. The Consulheiro leaned forward. They genuinely do not understand the tension. Voxlon answered quietly. No. They understand efficiency. Everything else is secondary. A junior officer spoke up. So what do we tell them? Voxlon stared at the human operations feed again. We tell them the truth, he said. Carefully. The meeting station was not what the Imperials expected. It was not ceremonial. It was not grand. It was a functional orbital platform used for logistics coordination. Metal framework. Docking arms. Cargo routing systems running constantly in the background. Humans treated it like any other workplace. The Imperial delegation arrived to find engineers walking past them carrying tools. No guards. No escorts. Just work continuing around them. That alone was enough to unsettle half the delegation. The Imperatrix was not present physically, but her authority was represented through encrypted live link. Voxlon stood in the central chamber alongside the diplomatic envoy. Across the table, Captain Chen and two human engineers sat down. One of them still had grease on his gloves. The envoy began. We are here to establish safety boundaries regarding your industrial fleet capabilities. Chen nodded. Okay. What specifically is unsafe? The envoy hesitated. Your vessels exceed military durability thresholds by significant margins. One of the human engineers tilted his head. Is that a problem? That question again. Simple. Honest. Completely disconnected from expectation. Voxlon answered this time. It becomes a problem when your civilian systems cannot be distinguished from military-grade assets. Chen thought about that for a moment. Then she replied. We do not build a difference. Silence. Even the background machinery noise seemed louder after that sentence. She continued. We build systems to survive extreme environments. Mining inside stars, gas giants, asteroid fields under pressure. If a system cannot survive that, it fails its job. The envoy responded carefully. But that means those same systems could be used in conflict. Chen nodded. Yes. So could rocks. So could planets. That is not why they exist. The engineer beside her added casually. If you hit anything hard enough with anything, it becomes a weapon. That is not a design choice. That is physics. No one replied immediately. Because technically, he was right. But politically, that answer was catastrophic. Voxlon leaned forward slightly. Do you understand why this worries us? Chen looked at him directly. You think we are hiding something. We think you may not realize what you have created. A pause. Then Chen spoke more slowly. We realize exactly what we have created. We just do not categorize it the same way you do. She gestured slightly. These are tools. Industrial systems. Infrastructure. We do not design them to fight because fighting is not part of their function. The envoy responded. And yet they outperform military vessels in controlled conflict simulations. One of the engineers sighed softly. We did not optimize for combat. That is exactly the concern, Voxlon said. Chen leaned back slightly. Let me ask you something, she said. If we built a ship designed purely for combat, no safety margins, no civilian constraints, just maximum efficiency for destruction, what do you think would happen? The room went still. Voxlon answered carefully. We believe it would be significantly more powerful than anything currently in service. Chen nodded. Yes. Probably. But we do not build that way because it is unstable. Systems without redundancy fail unpredictably. She paused. And unpredictable systems kill crews. The Imperials did not respond. Because that answer did not sound like diplomacy. It sounded like engineering logic applied to war itself. Voxlon finally spoke again. That is why we are here. To prevent misunderstanding from becoming escalation. Chen looked at him. We are not escalating anything. We know that, he replied. But capability does not require intent to become dangerous. A long silence settled. Then Chen said something quieter. So what do you want us to do? That was the real question. Not accusation. Not defense. Decision. Voxlon hesitated. We want assurance that your industrial fleet will remain non-military in design and purpose. Chen nodded immediately. That is already true. And we want transparency regarding future developments. Also fine. And we want mutual understanding that any system capable of extreme force will be classified and monitored. That made Chen pause. Monitored by who? Both sides. One of the human engineers laughed once under his breath. So we are building a paperwork alliance around mining ships. Chen shot him a look. He stopped. Then she turned back. Fine, she said. We can agree to transparency. The envoy exhaled slightly. But Voxlon was still watching her closely. There is something else, he said. Chen waited. You still do not understand why we are concerned. Chen answered honestly. No. I think you are assuming intent where there is none. Voxlon shook his head slightly. It is not intent we are worried about, he said. It is realization. Chen frowned. Realization of what? Voxlon leaned forward. That your mining ships are already warships in all but designation. The only difference is philosophy. The room went quiet again. Chen did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was steady. Then your concern is not what we are, she said. It is what you think we might decide to become. Voxlon did not deny it. Because that was exactly it. And that was the point where both civilizations finally saw the same problem from opposite sides. Humanity saw tools. The Empire saw potential weapons. And neither side was willing to change their definition. Outside the station, a massive human mining vessel rotated slowly into position. A fragment of an asteroid the size of a small city drifted into its processing field. In moments, it was reduced to raw material streams and energy output charts. No explosions. No violence. Just conversion. Voxlon watched it for a long time through the viewport. Then he said quietly. If your species ever decides to stop mining and start fighting, the galaxy will not be ready. Chen followed his gaze. We are not planning to stop mining. I believe you, he said. That was the first honest agreement between them. And somehow, it made everything more complicated, not less. Because belief did not remove risk. It only defined where trust had to be built. And trust, in a galaxy like this, was the most dangerous infrastructure of all. Fire if you want the next part, like, subscribe, and share. The story is heading towards something neither side is fully prepared for yet. The treaty was supposed to end the uncertainty. Instead, it organized it. That was how the Imperatrix described it during the closed council session, while the finalized agreement floated in holographic form above the chamber floor. It does not remove the problem, she said. It simply defines the edges of it. The Almirant Voxlon stood nearby, arms folded behind him. And those edges are stable, he added. For now. The scientific advisor gave a short, uneasy sound. In theory, yes. That single word carried too much weight. Because theory had been doing most of the work since humanity entered imperial awareness. In theory, mining ships were not weapons. In theory, civilian intent mattered more than capability. In theory, civilizations could be measured by stated purpose instead of structural outcome. But nothing about the human data fit comfortably into theory. The Imperatrix turned toward the projected treaty clauses. Humanity agreed to no dedicated warship development. The Empire agreed to non-interference in human industrial expansion. Both sides agreed to transparency in high-capacity engineering systems. It looked balanced. It felt balanced. But it did not feel finished. Send it, she said. And the galaxy shifted slightly without making a sound. For a brief period after the treaty, things improved. Trade routes opened. Engineers exchanged designs. Imperial researchers studied human materials science with something close to disbelief. Humanity, in return, received improved navigation algorithms that reduced FTL drift errors by nearly half. On paper, it was cooperation. In practice, it was something closer to mutual recalibration. But beneath all of it, the same quiet tension remained. Because neither side had stopped thinking about the test. The moment Imperial weapons failed to damage a mining hull. The moment human systems absorbed energy like it was background noise. The moment both civilizations realized they were not operating on the same scale of assumption. On a mining colony orbiting a barren moon, Captain Chen stood on a viewing platform watching a new vessel being assembled. It was larger than the unbreakable labor. Stronger too, if the projections were correct. One of her engineers walked up beside her. "They are still watching us," he said. Chen nodded. "I know. Do you think they will ever stop worrying?" She considered that. Then answered honestly. "No." A pause. "Because we cannot prove we are safe in a language they understand." The engineer leaned on the railing. "We could always build something smaller." Chen shook her head immediately. "No. That was not hesitation. That was certainty. If we start weakening our systems to make someone else comfortable, we lose the reason they are safe in the first place." The engineer nodded slowly. "So we just keep building?" "Better," she said. "Not weaker." And above them, another frame of reality was forming. Not human. Not imperial. Something shared in between. Because the Empire was not ignoring humanity. It was studying it constantly. And what it found was becoming increasingly difficult to categorize. A species that optimized for survival instead of combat. A civilization that treated redundancy as sacred. A technology base that treated failure as unacceptable rather than expected. And worst of all, a cultural instinct that did not distinguish between industrial scale and strategic scale. Everything large enough became interchangeable in consequence. A mining drill that could pierce a planetary crust did not need to be redesigned to destroy a ship. It only needed to be pointed. That was the realization that kept returning to Imperial War simulations. Over and over again. In different forms. Always the same conclusion. Wrong assumptions do not reduce danger. They multiply it. At the next Imperial Council session, the tone had changed. Less fear. More analysis. The Imperatrix observed the new simulation feed. A human industrial vessel responding to a hypothetical pirate attack. It did not switch systems. It did not deploy weapons. It simply continued mining while reorienting its gravitational manipulators. The pirate vessel disintegrated within seconds of entering operational range. Not because it was targeted as an enemy. But because it entered a working field designed for mass displacement. The scientific advisor spoke carefully. This is the consistent pattern. Their systems do not shift between civilian and military behavior. They operate in a single mode. Output. The Almirant added quietly. And output is overwhelming. The Imperatrix looked at him. That is the core issue, she said. They do not compartmentalize capability. A diplomat frowned. Most species do. It is standard development. Yes, she replied. And that is why most species are predictable. The room went silent again. Because predictability was the foundation of all imperial doctrine. And humanity was steadily refusing to fit inside it. At that moment, a new transmission arrived. Human origin. Priority, informal. It was labeled as a routine industrial update. It was not flagged as urgent. Which was exactly why it drew immediate attention. Captain Chen appeared on screen again, slightly tired, holding a data slate. Quick update from the outer belt operations, she said. We are scaling up extraction by about 12% this quarter due to new refinery efficiency. She paused. Also, we tested a new hull reinforcement pattern on the prototype vessel. It performed above expectations in thermal stress conditions. The Imperial advisors leaned forward slightly. The Almirant narrowed his eyes. Define above expectations. Chen looked down at her slate. It survived full atmospheric entry into a gas giant and came out with minimal structural fatigue. Silence. No one spoke for a moment. Then the scientific advisor asked quietly. Why would you test that? Chen blinked. Because we might need to do it someday. That answer landed harder than intended. Not because it was aggressive. But because it was routine. As if surviving gas giant entry was just another checkbox in design validation. The Imperatrix finally spoke. Captain Chen. Yes. Do you understand why your engineering decisions are alarming to us? Chen sighed slightly. Yes. Because you interpret durability as intent. And you do not. We interpret durability as insurance. A pause. Then she added something more precise. If something can survive extreme conditions, it reduces the probability of failure in normal conditions. That is the point. The Almirant leaned forward. But your normal conditions include energy levels comparable to military engagements. Chen nodded. Because space is not gentle. That sentence ended the exchange cleanly. Because it was not philosophical. It was environmental. And environmental truths are difficult to argue with. After the transmission ended, the council remained quiet longer than usual. Then the Imperatrix spoke. They are not preparing for war, she said slowly. They are preparing for everything except war. The diplomat frowned. Is there a difference? The Imperatrix looked at him. That is the question we have not yet answered. Far away, in human space, nothing changed in appearance. Ships kept mining. Stations kept expanding. Children still watched construction vessels move across the sky like slow-moving moons. But in the background, something subtle had shifted. Imperial observers were no longer asking if humanity was dangerous. They were asking how long it would remain unintentionally safe. And that question had no comforting answer. Because every system has a threshold. And humanity had not found theirs yet. Not even close. It started in the places the Empire was not watching closely. That was the part no one admitted out loud in the council chamber later. The Imperium had assumed that once they understood humanity, the rest of the galaxy would follow the same understanding. They were wrong. Because information does not travel evenly in space. It fragments. It mutates. It becomes something else by the time it reaches a new listener. And humanity was now spreading through that fragmented perception like a story no one could agree on. The first independent reaction came from the Karu Syndicate. A trade-aligned civilization that valued profit over doctrine and avoided imperial authority whenever possible. Their envoy received a basic intelligence packet. Human mining vessels. Human industrial output. Human durability test results. At first, they did not believe it. So they tested it themselves. A small syndicate raiding craft intercepted a human cargo convoy near the Helion Drift. Standard procedure. Light pressure. Quick capture. Minimal resistance expected. What they encountered instead was a transport vessel that did not accelerate, did not evade, and did not broadcast distress. It simply continued forward. The raiders fired a warning shot. The shot impacted the hull and scattered like dust. The syndicate commander ordered escalation. More firepower. Higher intensity. By the third volley, their weapons systems were reporting overheating. By the fifth, their targeting computers were recalibrating in confusion. The human vessel still had not changed behavior. It was only when a debris field from a nearby asteroid drifted into its path that the ship adjusted slightly, not to avoid combat, but to maintain route integrity. The Syndicate commander froze the engagement. Not because he was merciful. Because he was no longer sure what he was shooting at. His report to his superiors contained a single line that would later circulate across half the known systems. They did not resist. Our weapons simply stopped matching. Within weeks, Syndicate cartels began rewriting internal risk assessments. Human space was marked as structurally unprofitable for aggression. Not safe. Not peaceful. Just unprofitable. But other civilizations interpreted that same event very differently. In the Veil Ascendancy, a militarized polity that had long considered itself the natural rival to the Imperial fleet, the report triggered something closer to obsession. They did not see inefficiency. They saw challenge. Their war council studied the same data the Syndicate had dismissed. Hull integrity exceeding known limits. Energy systems absorbing extreme output. Industrial machinery functioning in conditions classified as lethal. A senior Ascendancy war architect finally spoke what others were thinking. If their civilian infrastructure behaves like this, then their military infrastructure must be beyond classification. That assumption changed everything. Because unlike the Syndicate, the Ascendancy did not interpret unknown strength as a reason to avoid conflict. They interpreted it as a reason to prepare harder. So they began building. Not diplomacy. Not trade. Fleet expansion. Specialized containment weapons. Experimental energy compression arrays designed specifically to overwhelm high-durability targets. They did not call it aggression. They called it preparedness. And in doing so, they became the first civilization outside the Empire to independently decide humanity required a response. Meanwhile, in Imperial space, the Council began receiving secondary reports. Not from their own observers. From border merchants. From independent explorers. From small navigation guilds that had no political alignment. The pattern was always the same. Human vessels encountered. Attempts at engagement. Expectation of vulnerability. Failure of that expectation. But the interpretation varied wildly. Some called humanity invincible. Some called them unstable. Some called them irrelevant but expensive to provoke. And some, the most dangerous group, called them incomplete. The Imperatrix read the compiled external intelligence in silence. Then she said something that made the entire council room tense. We are no longer the only ones defining what humanity is. The Almirant responded immediately. That was always inevitable. No, she replied. Not at this speed. Because something unusual was happening. The galaxy was not converging on a single understanding of humanity. It was splitting into competing interpretations. And competing interpretations always lead to conflict. At the edge of human mining territory, Captain Chen was dealing with a very different kind of escalation. A third fleet had arrived. Not Imperial. Not Syndicate. Not Ascendancy. Unidentified. Their transmission was unstable, their language partially translated, their intent unclear. Chen stood in the operations bay watching the sensor feed. Another engineer walked in behind her. More visitors. Seems like it, she said. Friendly. Chen paused. That depends on what they think we are. The unknown fleet opened communication. Their message was short. We request demonstration of your structural limits. Chen blinked. That is an unusual greeting, she said. The fleet did not respond to the humor. We require verification of your durability claims. One of the engineers muttered. Why does everyone want to hit us lately? Chen raised a hand. Because they do not understand us yet. She activated the channel. This is Captain Chen, she said. What exactly are you trying to verify? A pause. Then the response came. If your vessels are truly beyond standard military capacity, then controlled force application should confirm resistance thresholds. Chen exhaled slowly. So you want to shoot us? Test us, they corrected. She leaned slightly forward. We are not a test range. A longer pause. Then the reply. If you are not willing to be tested, your claims cannot be verified. Chen glanced at her engineering team. One of them shrugged. Technically, we already survived the Empire. Another added. And the Syndicate incident went poorly for them. Chen sighed. That is not a standard we want to keep setting. She returned to the channel. Listen carefully, she said. We are not a combat vessel. We are a mining platform. If you apply force to us, you are interfering with industrial operations. The response was immediate. Industrial classification does not negate verification requirements. Chen rubbed her forehead. Of course it does. Then she stopped. Because she realized something. They were not trying to attack. They were trying to categorize. And humanity, for them, did not fit any existing category. Which meant they would keep testing until it did. She made a decision. Stand by, she said. We will allow a controlled evaluation under strict conditions. Her engineers looked at her sharply. That is a bad idea, one said. I know, she replied. But refusing just turns this into repeated incidents. She opened the internal channel. We are going to let them test us once, she said. Controlled. Documented. Then we end it. No one liked it. But no one had a better solution. Outside the ship, the unknown fleet repositioned. Across Imperial space, the Council received immediate alert updates. The Syndicate was observing. The Ascendancy was observing. Multiple minor powers were now observing. Humanity had become a shared point of focus. And shared focus in galactic politics rarely remained peaceful for long. The Imperatrix watched all incoming reports in silence. Then she spoke. They are no longer reacting to humanity as a curiosity, she said. They are reacting as if humanity is a resource. The diplomat frowned. A resource? She nodded toward the display. Something to be measured, tested, understood, and eventually controlled. The Almirant's tone hardened slightly. And that is where escalation begins. Because every civilization in the galaxy had the same instinct. If something could not be easily classified, it eventually became something to compete over. And now multiple powers were beginning to converge on the same conclusion from different directions. Humanity was not a threat yet. But it was becoming an opportunity. Or a necessity. Or a future advantage. And that was far more unstable than fear. Far away, Captain Chen stood watching as external emitters from the unknown fleet powered up for their controlled evaluation. One of her engineers spoke quietly. So this is normal now? Chen gave a tired half-smile. No, she said. This is what happens when everyone realizes you do not fit their rulebook. The first impact pulse hit the hull. And for the first time since humanity entered galactic awareness. Multiple civilizations held their breath at the same moment. Waiting to see what a mining ship would do when the galaxy finally stopped asking politely. And started asking with force. The answer was not going to stay theoretical for long. Because now, everyone was watching. And someone, somewhere, was about to find out what industrial-scale survival engineering actually meant when it stopped pretending to be civilian. The moment the first impact pulse struck the human hull, every observer understood something important. Not what would happen next. But that nothing about this situation could go back to being simple again. On the unknown fleet's command deck, their sensors locked in, expecting deformation, energy bleed, structural stress signals, anything that would translate into familiar language. Instead, the readings barely registered as an event. The impact energy dispersed across the surface layer like a drop of water hitting a planetary ocean. No penetration. No shock response. No structural fatigue spike worth logging. Just absorption, redistribution, and silence. A junior analyst stared at the screen. That should have registered. A senior officer narrowed their eyes. It did register, he said slowly. Just not in a way we understand. Inside the human vessel, the response was almost insultingly normal. One engineer glanced at a readout panel. That was weaker than docking stress. Another leaned back in his chair. So are we done now? Captain Chen did not answer immediately. She was watching the external feed. The unknown fleet had not escalated. Not yet. That was the dangerous part. Because curiosity mixed with disbelief does not stop after one data point. It demands confirmation. The fleet commander issued a second test. This one stronger. More deliberate. Focused energy discharge designed to simulate sustained combat pressure. The pulse hit harder. Space around the human vessel lit up briefly as energy scattered across shielding layers that were never explicitly labeled as shields in Imperial doctrine, because humans did not describe them that way. They called it hull integrity management. A system of material science, energy distribution, and structural redundancy so deeply integrated that separating defense from function made no sense. The result was the same. No damage. No meaningful heat retention. No visible response. And now something changed on the unknown fleet. Not confidence. Not aggression. Confusion sharpening into concern. Because they had built their entire approach around the assumption that if something resisted force, it would still react to force. Everything in the galaxy did. Everything except this. The fleet commander opened a communication channel. This is not yielding expected results. Chen's face appeared on screen again. She looked more tired now, less patient. I told you, she said. We are not built to respond to that kind of input. A pause. The commander responded. Then what are you built for? Chen glanced sideways at her engineering team. Someone muttered. Apparently this conversation now. She ignored it. We are built for continuous operation in extreme environments, she said. If you are trying to simulate combat, you are applying the wrong model. The commander leaned forward. Your model and ours do not align. Chen nodded slightly. That is becoming clear. On Imperial monitoring stations far away, the same data was being analyzed in parallel. The Imperatrix watched silently as the unknown fleet repeated the test with increased intensity. Each escalation produced the same result. Not destruction. Not resistance failure. Just irrelevance. The Almirant finally spoke. They are probing for limits. The scientific advisor corrected him. They are probing for familiar behavior patterns. A pause. Then he added something quieter. And finding none. That sentence carried weight. Because civilizations rely on pattern recognition more than raw power. And humanity was proving increasingly pattern resistant. Back at the encounter site, the unknown fleet shifted tactics. Instead of brute force, they switched to precision targeting. Small energy lances designed to identify structural weak points. Multiple synchronized strikes across predicted stress nodes. A more intelligent approach. A more patient one. A more concerning one. Chen noticed immediately. They are trying to map us, she said. One of the engineers frowned. That sounds worse than shooting. It usually is, she replied. The strikes landed. And again, nothing meaningful happened. But something unexpected did occur. The human vessel adjusted. Not defensively. Not reactively. Operationally. A small section of its outer hull redistributed load automatically, rerouting stress pathways as if the incoming energy had been classified as environmental turbulence rather than hostile action. One engineer blinked. Our system just optimized around them. Chen narrowed her eyes. Without instruction. Autonomous structural balancing, he confirmed. It thinks we are docking near a gravity anomaly. Silence followed that. Because it revealed something neither side had fully considered. Human systems were not interpreting the attack as combat. They were interpreting it as inefficient environmental interference. And that meant they were not responding at all in the way the attackers expected. On the unknown fleet, frustration began to rise. Their commander issued a third escalation. This time, sustained output. Not a strike. A pressure field. A continuous energy envelope designed to simulate long-term battlefield conditions. It activated and wrapped around the human vessel like an invisible storm. And then it did something no one expected. It stabilized. The field did not disrupt the human ship. It was absorbed into its operational tolerance range. Not instantly neutralized. Not reflected. Normalized. As if the human vessel had simply decided that this new environmental condition was part of existing space. One technician on the unknown fleet whispered. That is not possible. Another replied. It is happening. And on Imperial observation channels, the same realization began forming independently. The Imperatrix leaned forward slightly. They are not resisting, she said. The Almirant responded slowly. They are incorporating. That was the turning point in understanding. Because resistance implies interaction. Incorporation implies indifference. And indifference to force was something the galaxy had very little experience with. On the human vessel, Captain Chen finally made a decision. She opened a direct channel. Her tone changed. Less patient now. More precise. You are wasting energy, she said. The fleet commander blinked. Explain. Chen gestured slightly toward the external feed. You are applying repeated stress tests without meaningful variation in method. Our systems are not degrading. Your outputs are being absorbed within nominal tolerance ranges. Continuing will not produce new data. A pause. Then she added something that landed heavily. If you are trying to understand us, you are asking the wrong questions. The commander stiffened. What would be the correct questions? Chen did not hesitate. Why would we ever design something that fails under conditions we regularly operate in? Silence. Not because the question was complex. But because it exposed a gap in logic assumptions. The commander responded carefully. Because all systems fail eventually. Chen nodded. Yes. That is why we design for failure containment, not avoidance. Another pause. She continued. You are trying to find the point where we break. We are telling you that we do not design critical systems with a single break point. The commander's voice lowered. Everything breaks. Chen looked directly at the camera. Not everything is designed to break in the same way. Back in Imperial space, the Council received updated analysis from multiple factions simultaneously. Syndicate interpretation. Human systems are economically invulnerable to standard force application. Ascendancy interpretation. Human systems require overwhelming specialized escalation to meaningfully impact. Imperial interpretation. Human systems do not behave like combat assets even when treated as such. 3 interpretations. 3 conclusions. All different. All unsettling. The Imperatrix finally spoke. They are forcing every civilization to redefine the concept of conflict. The diplomat frowned. How? She gestured toward the data. Because conflict assumes shared rules of engagement. A pause. And they do not appear to be playing by any. Meanwhile, the unknown fleet was reaching its own breaking point. Not structurally. Psychologically. The commander lowered intensity. Then lowered it again. Then stopped entirely. The field collapsed. Silence returned to space. The human vessel continued moving through the region as if nothing had occurred. Chen's voice returned. Are we done? The commander did not answer immediately. A pause. We will submit our findings. Chen nodded once. Good. We have maintenance schedules to return to. The channel closed. And just like that, the encounter ended. No victory declaration. No diplomatic resolution. No escalation into conflict. Just a series of tests that produced no usable classification. On Imperial monitors, the data was archived. And flagged. And reflagged. And finally labeled with a term no one liked. Unresolved capability class. The Almirant read it once. Then said quietly. That is not a category. The scientific advisor responded. It is becoming one. The Imperatrix stood still for a long moment. Then she said something that reframed everything again. We are no longer observing a species. She paused. We are observing a design philosophy that does not recognize our constraints. Far away, Captain Chen reviewed post-test diagnostics. One engineer asked her. Do we report this as an incident? Chen thought for a moment. No, she said. Report it as routine environmental validation. The engineer frowned. That seems inaccurate. Chen shrugged slightly. It is accurate from our perspective. She turned back to the console. They are still learning how to ask the right questions. Until then, everything we show them will look like the wrong answer. Outside, another mining vessel rotated into position near an asteroid field. Cutting. Processing. Building. As if the universe itself was just another material to be shaped into something safer. And somewhere across the galaxy, multiple civilizations quietly reached the same conclusion at different speeds. Humanity was not escalating. Humanity was not preparing. Humanity was simply operating. And anything that tried to measure that operation using combat logic was going to keep getting the same result. No damage detected. No meaningful response. No recognizable limit found. Just a civilization that had already built past the concept of stopping. And had not informed anyone else where that boundary used to be. The phrase, no recognizable limit found, did not sit comfortably in any galactic language. It kept getting translated incorrectly. Some systems rendered it as, unknown strength. Others as, unclassified threat. A few, more honest than the rest, left it as raw data with no interpretation at all. But in every case, the meaning settled into the same shape. Humanity could not be measured in the usual way anymore. And that realization began to spread faster than any fleet. Not through official channels. Through traders. Through scouts. Through fragments of sensor logs shared between stations that were not supposed to be sharing anything at all. And every time the data moved, it changed slightly. It became sharper. More exaggerated. More incomplete. By the time it reached the outer neutral systems, humanity was no longer being described as a species. It was being described as a problem that behaved like a civilization. On the Imperial side, this distortion was monitored carefully. The Imperatrix called for a closed advisory session. No fleets. No external feeds. Just the core decision makers and the rawest version of the truth they had. A single projection filled the chamber. Human mining vessel operational data. Human stress test outcomes. Human response logs from 3 independent factions. When the data finished cycling, the room did not speak for several seconds. Then the Almirant finally broke the silence. We are no longer the only ones observing them. The diplomat nodded. Correct. Multiple powers are now conducting independent assessments. The scientific advisor added something more troubling. And none of those assessments agree. That was the real issue. Disagreement in interpretation meant divergence in response. And divergence meant instability. The Imperatrix stepped closer to the projection. What are the current interpretations? The diplomat answered first. Syndicate position. Humanity is economically non-hostile but structurally disruptive. Engagement should be avoided unless profitably controlled. The Almirant continued. Ascendancy position. Humanity represents a latent strategic asset that must be studied, replicated, or countered depending on feasibility. The scientist added quietly. And several minor states have begun classifying them as either divine engineering or accidental apocalypse, depending on cultural bias. A pause. Then the Imperatrix spoke. And the unknown fleet? Silence. Then the Almirant answered. They have not submitted a formal conclusion. That was not unusual. But what followed was. They are requesting a second evaluation. The Imperatrix narrowed her eyes. A second attempt at force application. Yes. She turned slightly. Denied. That response surprised a few of the council members. The diplomat frowned. Your Majesty, refusing interaction may push them toward escalation elsewhere. The Imperatrix shook her head slightly. No, she said. What pushes them toward escalation is the assumption that repetition will create clarity. She gestured toward the projection. You cannot test something that does not operate under your test conditions and expect truth to emerge. A pause. Then she added something colder. You only create misunderstanding with better data. Across the galaxy, however, that was exactly what was happening. The Ascendancy fleet analysts were already building next-generation countermodels. The Syndicate was calculating containment economics. And the unknown fleet was preparing a revised evaluation protocol with significantly higher energy thresholds. All independently. All simultaneously. And all incorrectly assuming that humanity would eventually respond in a way that could be mapped. Meanwhile, in human space, the reaction was far simpler. Confusion. Not fear. Not pride. Just confusion at why so many ships kept showing up to interrupt production cycles. On the unbreakable labor, Captain Chen stood in the operations bay reviewing the latest anomaly report. Another engineer walked in. That was the third evaluation attempt this month. Chen did not look up. I know. Are we expecting more? She paused. Yes. The engineer frowned. Should we be worried? Chen finally looked at him. No, she said. We should be consistent. That answer did not help much. Another engineer leaned back in his chair. I still do not understand why they keep trying different weapons. At some point you think they would just accept the data. Chen exhaled slightly. They are not testing us anymore, she said. They are testing their understanding of us. That made the room quieter. Because it reframed everything. Not aggression. Not diplomacy. Misalignment. And misalignment was harder to resolve than hostility. Outside the station, another human vessel detached from dock and moved toward an asteroid belt. No alarms. No escort. No acknowledgement of the fleets watching from long-range sensors. Just movement toward work. Routine. Stable. Unchanging. And that stability itself was becoming the most disruptive force in the galaxy. Because every faction observing humanity was now forced to adjust their models. The Syndicate began quietly avoiding direct human trade routes. Not because they were afraid. Because their risk models could no longer assign meaningful probability values. The Ascendancy increased fleet readiness. Not because they expected immediate conflict. But because uncertainty was becoming expensive. And the unknown fleet. They did something no one predicted. They stopped calling it a test. They reclassified it as an encounter. That single change in terminology shifted their entire operational doctrine. Because tests assume answers exist. Encounters assume they might not. Back in Imperial space, the Imperatrix reviewed this shift carefully. She noticed something subtle. They are adapting faster than expected, she said. The scientific advisor nodded. Yes. But not toward understanding. Toward accommodation of uncertainty. The diplomat frowned. Is that not the same thing? The Imperatrix shook her head. No. A pause. One leads to clarity. The other leads to caution without resolution. She looked at the projection again. And caution spreads faster than clarity. That was the part that worried her most. Because fear had a boundary. Ignorance had a boundary. But caution without understanding could expand indefinitely. And humanity, unintentionally, was becoming the center of that expansion. Far away, another human mining operation began. A vessel the size of a small city detached its processing array and drifted into position near a dense asteroid cluster. Inside, engineers monitored outputs. One of them spoke casually. So are we still the weird ones, or did the galaxy catch up yet? Chen, watching the telemetry, answered without hesitation. We are still the same. A pause. And they are still guessing. The engineer nodded. That sounds stable. Chen allowed herself a small, tired smile. It is the only stable thing we have right now. And as the mining lasers ignited and began carving structure from raw rock, somewhere far beyond human sensor range, multiple civilizations reached a shared but unspoken conclusion. Humanity was no longer a new contact. It was now a factor. And factors, once introduced into a system, never stay contained for long. They multiply. They spread. They change the equations entirely. And the galaxy had not yet finished discovering what kind of equation humanity actually was. The problem with introducing a new factor into a galactic system is not the initial shock. It is what happens after everyone starts adjusting to it at the same time. Because adjustment is never coordinated. It spreads unevenly. Like gravity finding weak points in structure that was never designed to hold it. And humanity, without meaning to, had become exactly that kind of pressure point. Not because it expanded aggressively. Not because it threatened anyone directly. But because every civilization that looked closely enough reached the same uncomfortable conclusion in their own language. Their systems work too well to be accidental. On the Imperial side, the Council was now running simulations that had stopped feeling like theoretical exercises and started feeling like psychological stress tests. The Imperatrix stood before a rotating model of known space, watching new lines of interaction form between factions that had previously ignored each other. Syndicate merchants avoiding human adjacency. Ascendancy patrols repositioning toward human-adjacent corridors. Neutral systems suddenly increasing defense budgets without formal declarations. And all of it triggered by a single shared variable. Human capability ambiguity. The Almirant finally spoke what everyone was thinking. They are not the center of the conflict, he said quietly. They are the reference point for every other conflict now. The diplomat exhaled. That is not sustainable. The Imperatrix did not respond immediately. Because she understood something the others were only beginning to see. Sustainability was not the question anymore. Trajectory was. And trajectories, once established, do not stop because they are inconvenient. They only stop when something larger interrupts them. She looked at the Council. We are watching the early formation of alignment pressure, she said. The scientist frowned. Alignment pressure? She nodded toward the holographic display. Independent civilizations adjusting their behavior around a shared uncertainty. A pause. And when enough independent systems adjust around the same uncertainty, they begin to align with each other without agreement. The diplomat slowly understood. So even without alliances. Yes, she interrupted. They begin acting like one system reacting to one phenomenon. That was the part no one liked. Because it meant humanity was no longer just being observed. It was becoming the central stimulus of galactic political evolution. Meanwhile, on the outer human industrial band, Captain Chen was dealing with something far more immediate. A coordination request from 3 separate factions arrived within the same operational cycle window. Syndicate Trade Delegation. Ascendancy Technical Observers. And the Unknown Fleet again. All requesting access. All requesting evaluation. All using different language, but identical intent. Chen stood in the operations bay reading the consolidated message. One of her engineers leaned over. That is not normal traffic flow. Chen nodded. It is convergence. The engineer frowned. What does that mean? Chen hesitated. It means they are starting to treat us as a shared system instead of separate encounters. She turned toward the console. And shared systems attract attention. A pause. Then she added more quietly. And competition. At that exact moment, the syndicate delegation arrived first. Not militarized. Not hostile. But heavily structured around economic optimization. Their envoy appeared on screen with practiced neutrality. We are here to discuss integration of human industrial output into interstellar supply frameworks. Chen blinked once. That is a very long way to say trade agreement. The envoy did not react. It is more precise. Sure, Chen said. What do you want specifically? The envoy hesitated. Access to your hull material synthesis techniques. One of the engineers behind Chen let out a quiet whistle. That is not a small request, Chen said carefully. The envoy responded immediately. We are prepared to offer significant resource exchange ratios. Chen leaned slightly forward. Why do you want it? A pause. Then the answer came. Because your structural materials outperform military-grade composites in multiple independent observations. Chen closed her eyes for a moment. Here it was again. The same misunderstanding returning in a different shape. You are still thinking in military terms, she said. The envoy replied. We are thinking in survivability terms. Military classification is irrelevant. That stopped Chen for a second. Because it was not wrong. It was just incomplete. She responded carefully. Our materials are not designed for combat, she said. They are designed for failure resistance in extreme environments. The envoy tilted slightly. That is exactly why they are valuable. A pause. Then he added something that shifted the tone. Your civilization appears to optimize for structural permanence rather than tactical advantage. Chen frowned. That is a strange way to say we do not want our ships to break. The envoy did not respond to the humor. Structural permanence has strategic implications. And that was the problem. Everything humans considered basic engineering safety was being reinterpreted as strategic capability. Because no one else built that way. Before Chen could respond, a second channel opened. Ascendancy Fleet. Their tone was different. More direct. Less curiosity. We request evaluation of human industrial propulsion scalability. Chen rubbed her forehead slightly. You are all asking the same thing in different ways. The Ascendancy officer responded. We are asking whether your industrial systems can be replicated under military constraints. Chen shook her head. No. A pause. Then she continued. Because they were not built under constraints. They were built under requirements. That line created silence on the other side. Because it inverted everything. Constraints imply limitation. Requirements imply necessity. And necessity produces very different engineering outcomes. Before the Ascendancy could respond, the Unknown Fleet opened a third channel. Their tone had changed compared to previous encounters. Less analytical. More cautious. We have reviewed previous interaction outcomes, they said. We are adjusting evaluation parameters. Chen blinked. You are still doing evaluations? A pause. Yes. She sighed. That is your problem. Another silence. Then the unknown commander responded. We do not yet understand your classification boundary. Chen leaned forward. There is no single boundary, she said. That is the point. That answer caused visible disruption in their response delay. Because it contradicted their entire methodology. Chen continued. You are trying to find where we stop being safe and start being dangerous. That is not how our systems are designed. She gestured slightly toward the console. Everything we build is designed to keep functioning under conditions that would normally destroy systems. There is no switch between safe and unsafe. There is only operational range. A pause. Then she added something quieter. If you apply enough force to anything, it will eventually fail. That is true for everyone. The difference is how much force is required. Back in Imperial space, the Council was now receiving simultaneous reports of these interactions. 3 factions. 3 interpretations. 3 escalating models of understanding. The diplomat spoke first. They are being approached as a resource, a threat, and a benchmark simultaneously. The scientist added. And all 3 interpretations are reinforcing each other. The Imperatrix finally understood the pattern fully. This is no longer about humanity alone, she said. The Almirant looked at her. Then what is it about? She turned toward the projection. It is about what happens when multiple civilizations try to define the same unknown at the same time. A pause. And none of them agree on what category it belongs to. The room went quiet. Because that was not a political problem. That was an instability event. Far away, in human space, Captain Chen ended the simultaneous calls and sat down for the first time in several hours. One of the engineers exhaled. That was 3 different civilizations asking for the same thing in completely different ways. Another added. And none of them understood the answer. Chen nodded slowly. That is going to keep happening. A pause. Then she said something that stayed in the room longer than anything else. We are not being studied anymore. The engineers looked at her. We are being positioned. Outside the station, another human mining vessel rotated into alignment with a dense asteroid field. Its systems activated. No weapons. No defenses. Just industrial output. But now, across the galaxy, every observer was no longer just watching what it did. They were watching what it meant. And meaning, once shared across competing civilizations, does not remain stable. It evolves. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes violently. But always inevitably. And somewhere in the silence between fleets, a new realization began to form. Humanity was no longer an anomaly. It was becoming a reference standard. And reference standards do something very dangerous in a fragmented galaxy. They force comparison. And comparison always leads to competition. Even when no one originally intended it. The galaxy did not end with a war. It rarely does. It ends instead with agreements, adjustments, and quiet decisions made far away from the people who will live inside their consequences. On the Imperial world, the final council session was smaller than all the others. No grand displays this time. No fleet projections. Just the Imperatrix, her closest advisors, and a single shared understanding that the situation had moved beyond observation. The Imperatrix stood before the projection of human industrial space. For a long time, she did not speak. Then she finally did. We attempted to classify them, she said. We attempted to test them. We attempted to predict them. A pause. And every attempt revealed the same thing. The Almirant finished the thought quietly. They do not fit into our categories. The diplomat added. And they do not need to. That sentence changed the tone of the room. Because it removed the last assumption everyone had been holding onto without admitting it. That humanity would eventually become understandable in familiar terms. The Imperatrix nodded slowly. So we stopped trying to define them as a threat or an ally, she said. And we define them as what they are. She turned toward the council. A separate trajectory of civilization. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Acceptance. Because it was the only interpretation that did not collapse under contradiction. Far away, in human space, nothing felt like an ending. There was no victory announcement. No celebration. No shift in daily routine. Captain Chen was reviewing mining outputs when one of her engineers walked in holding a report. They stopped the evaluations, he said. Chen looked up. All of them? Across all observed fleets. Syndicate, Ascendancy, unknown groups. No further test requests. She leaned back slightly. That is new. The engineer nodded. Apparently we broke their testing models. Chen gave a tired half-smile. We did not break them, she corrected. We just never fit inside them in the first place. A pause. Then she added. What about diplomacy? Still ongoing, he said. But it is mostly trade now. Materials, propulsion data, structural analysis. Chen nodded. Good. That is where it should be. She stood and looked out through the observation window. Another mining vessel drifted across the asteroid belt, steady and methodical. No urgency. No threat posture. Just work continuing as it always had. The engineer watched her for a moment. Do you think they will ever fully understand us? Chen did not answer immediately. Not because she did not know. But because the answer was not simple. Finally she said. Not fully. A pause. But enough. Enough for what? Chen looked back at the vast machinery of human industry moving silently through space. Enough to stop trying to solve us like a problem. Outside, across the galaxy, something quieter than war had taken place. Not peace. Not unity. Not dominance. Realignment. Every major civilization had adjusted its internal assumptions about power. The Syndicate treated humanity as economically untouchable infrastructure. The Ascendancy treated them as a strategic unknown requiring caution rather than confrontation. The Empire treated them as a partner that could not be categorized as subordinate or superior without risking instability. And humanity remained unchanged through all of it. Still building. Still mining. Still optimizing survival through engineering rather than intent. They had not become the galaxy's strongest power. They had become something more uncomfortable. A civilization that proved strength did not require awareness of strength. And that idea spread quietly, reshaping doctrine after doctrine, simulation after simulation, across thousands of systems. Until eventually, the galaxy reached a new equilibrium. Not built on control. Not built on fear. But built on acknowledgement of limitation. There were things it could not classify. Things it could not predict. Things it could not safely force into familiar roles. And humanity, unintentionally, sat at the center of that realization. Not as conquerors. Not as victims. But as engineers of a reality the rest of the galaxy had not been designed to interpret. Back on Earth, a child looked up at the night sky from a colony observation deck. Are we important? She asked. Her mother, an engineer working on orbital infrastructure, smiled slightly without looking away from her console. I think we are busy, she said. The child frowned. That is not the same. The mother paused, then answered honestly. No, she said. But sometimes being busy changes more things than being important. Above them, a massive human vessel passed slowly through orbit, its system steady, its purpose unchanged. Not a weapon. Not a symbol. Just a machine built to keep humanity going in a universe that did not care whether it did or not. And far beyond human space, fleets that once considered themselves judges, testers, or potential conquerors quietly changed their posture. Not toward war. Not toward submission. Toward caution that had learned respect the hard way. The galaxy did not belong to humanity. Humanity did not belong to the galaxy. They simply now existed in the same reality. And both sides, in their own way, understood the same final truth. Some civilizations expand by conquering space. Others expand by surviving it so efficiently that space has to adjust around them. And when those two approaches meet, the result is not a victory. It is a redefinition of what was possible all along. The stars continue to burn. The ships continue to move. And humanity, unaware of the scale of what it had changed, kept building anyway. Because from their point of view, nothing important had happened at all. And that, more than anything else in the galaxy, was what everyone else had learned to fear, respect, and quietly adapt to. Not a threat. Not a weapon. Just inevitability wrapped in engineering. And it was already too late to treat it as anything else.